Hey there, What Next TBD listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence. So you're on a road trip right now. Where are you?
We woke up this morning in Boyne Falls. We rolled in around 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock last night after a fairly long drive from Traverse City, where we found one of 4 fast chargers. The other 3 were broken, and we desperately needed the fast charge.
Paula Gardner is a business reporter for Bridge, Michigan. We used to work together at MLive. A few weeks ago, Paula and 2 other Bridge reporters set out in a Chevy Bolt across Michigan. They're taking something called the Lake Michigan Circuit, a cross-state route that officials have promised you can do with an EV, not a hybrid, a fully electric vehicle.
There are wonderful places to go in Michigan and also better places that we could be going if we wanted consistent fast charging. But instead, we're doing this route. We feel like this is the tourist route. This is what people might be tempted to do. And there's also been some promises in the background telling us that it would be possible.
The Lake Michigan Circuit follows the Lake Michigan coastline. Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana have been working to create a route along the 1,100-mile drivable coastline that is EV-friendly. But Paula says they've hit plenty of snags along the way. A big one being charging the car.
We had a crisis yesterday. We realized that the math was not in our favor and that we were cutting it way too close between 2 stops. And there was no real alternative because the last stop was the closest charger. So we just kind of closed our eyes except for the driver and crossed our fingers and made it with probably no charge to spare.
Michigan is known for its cars, but EVs are proving to be a whole other beast here and everywhere else in the U.S. Not too long ago, there was excitement about EVs. They were shedding their crunchy hippie image. Tesla had kind of made them cool. But then the tide began to turn.
Electric vehicles may save drivers on the cost of filling up. But this winter, growing frustrations for drivers stuck waiting at charging stations.
Jerika, EV enthusiasm is fading. Slumping sales and production delays make it clear that it's not quite full speed ahead to America's all-electric future.
Maybe it's the lack of infrastructure. Maybe it's the Musk effect. But recently, people have started to wonder, is the EV dead?
It is not, despite headlines you have heard to that effect.
That's Slate writer Nitish Pahwa. One of his recent pieces is called "The Death of the Electric Vehicle Has Been Greatly Exaggerated." So you can guess where he stands.
There have certainly been hiccups in the electric car market, but sales are still very strong.
Nitish says that despite some of the infrastructure hurdles Paula and her colleagues are running into in Michigan, and despite the cascade of recent negative coverage, EVs, they're doing good.
Pretty much anywhere you look, especially in like any major city in any big state, you can see that e-bikes, certain electric car models, even charging stations are gradually popping up more and more these days. They're very much all around us.
For a lot of people, the benefits of the electric vehicle, helping the environment, volatile gas prices, etc., are worth it. Even Paula says she's into the EV. Do you think that you would get a fully electric vehicle living in Michigan? And would you take it on another road trip?
I do think I would get one, and I would take it on a road trip. I'm learning some of the tricks right now, and I feel like, if every plan that's in motion right now is fulfilled, it'll just get easier and easier.
Today on the show, The EV market has hit some speed bumps, but here's why it's powering through. I'm Cheyna Roth, filling in for Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained, a lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. I want to start by going through the rise of the electric vehicle market. It seems like just a few years ago, the talk about electric vehicles, also called EVs, was really optimistic and forward-looking. What did the growth of the EV market look like over the past decade or so?
So you can really go back. I think the watershed moment was the late 90s when Toyota started rolling out the Prius.
There's a change happening. It begins with Prius, Toyota's revolutionary hybrid vehicle, and continues with more vehicles rated most fuel efficient in their class than any other.
Combining the battery and gas engine power and just making a lower emitting, more energy efficient vehicle. But the fully battery powered vehicle didn't really come about till much later after that, when Tesla started really developing this space and getting designs out there and getting a lot of federal support from the American government, especially in the stimulus packages following the recession. So once that started taking off, and once that battery technology started scaling more, other automakers were finally able to start exploring it for themselves. But for the longest time, because we didn't have a lot of the accompanying infrastructure that we needed for these, chargers, battery range, weight, and for a long time, they really weren't going much of anywhere outside of like a few states, especially in California. But once more tax credits started coming from the Biden administration, we started to see much more of a swift turn toward non-gas powered fleets.
It seemed like for a while there was a lot of optimism about electric vehicles. They stopped being like, this punchline or idea that we're years and years away from them, and they started to become and people started to become really optimistic about this growth. But when did that growth and optimism in the market slow down? It seems like in the last year or so, there have been just a slew of negative headlines about EVs, like how EVs became such a massive disappointment, or EV euphoria is dead. Automakers are scaling back or delaying their electric vehicle plans. When did this turn really start to happen?
Yeah, over the past couple years, especially, there have been a decent number of shocks as like the general global economy recovered from COVID, especially, and other factors started to weigh in. I mean, for one, the minerals and metals and parts for a lot of these cars tend to come from countries with which we have like pretty fraught geopolitical tensions, trade wars with China or like literal war tearing apart regions like Ukraine and the Congo. There's also a complexity that comes with a lot of the newer electric cars where these car makers aren't just making like a car with a big battery in it. They're also adding all sorts of these nice computerized features and making something really interactive. So as EVs kind of became this like proving ground, you could say, for other new car tech and features as well, these cars also became a little more expensive to insure, a little more complicated to repair, and just in general figure out how to like maintain and fix over time, because so much of what else we have in terms of like gas stations, auto mechanics, car washes, whatnot, they're all still geared for traditional gas engine cars, right? And I think you see that fueling some hesitation on certain car owners' parts.
This feels like the biggest reason people are hesitant to buy an EV. There are just not a lot of places to charge them. And that was supposed to get fixed. 2 years ago, the Biden administration promised to build 500,000 charging stations by 2030, which is just 6 years away. But so far, only 8 stations have been built. I mean, are people just in generally scared that they're going to run out of a charge if they get an EV?
I think so. Range anxiety is what they call it. That's very much a thing. And I think it also depends on where you live. Again, a place like California that's been at the forefront of this has been less of a concern than perhaps in more rural states or in other states where they just haven't built that out as widely yet. A lot of EVs have gotten much better in terms of distance they can travel on a single charge, how fast they charge, how fast they can go, and how long they last and can be prepared. But again, we still haven't seen that at scale yet. We definitely need more options on the market.
Infrastructure isn't the only thing slowing EVs down. Electric vehicles are also pricey. They cost nearly 10 grand more on average than a gas-powered car. Experts say that, plus the lack of infrastructure, has led to a drop in some EV sales. But despite all these setbacks, Nitish is not convinced the EV is out of juice. For one, that drop in sales we just mentioned mostly applies to Tesla. The company had a 45% drop in profits last quarter, but Nitish says Tesla has some other stuff going on right now.
I think because it was such an industry leader, people have looked at the sales drop in Tesla as like a bad sign for the EV market. But I think there's a few things we need to consider here. One is that Tesla just has a lot more competition on the market now. Two is that, speaking very frankly, Elon's quite a radical turn in terms of his politics have kind of made him a polarizing figure among people who would be more apt to buy his cars, those being, uh, liberal suburban types who are concerned about climate change. And when they see what this man says and they see that they can get, other EVs elsewhere, they are not inclined to go with Tesla as much as they may have been even just a few years previously. So looking at the Tesla spreadsheet is certainly indicative, but it is not the whole story. If you really look at the overall market, if you look at all the companies that are big players right now, from startups to established car makers, if you look at the models that have popped up in, again, just like the past 5 years, it's amazing how many more options we have now and like how well they've sold. It's a much rosier picture than I think a lot of people realize.
What about the variety of EV options on the market? Is that an area that we're also seeing growth?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more, and this is something that doesn't get always counted in EV sales. So many people kind of think of EVs solely as cars, but they're not thinking necessarily about, say, buses and public transit. They're not thinking about scooters, which obviously have been popping off quite a bit, both in the personal and shared level over the past few years. Same thing with bikes and electrified mopeds. Same thing with the electrified golf carts with their tiny little battery motors. Same thing with boats, even, although that market's not as huge yet. It's still one that's very much taking off. I mean, there are just so many ways you can electrify your ride and change it up. And I think in general, this should be an opportunity for anyone already interested in buying an EV to also consider, just how car centric our infrastructure is and the ways we can change that. Because I don't think we are going to like drive our way out of climate change by just replacing gas cars on the road with battery cars. We need to also rethink a lot of our modes of transit. And I think just the fact that there are EVs out there that are pretty viable and that are not cars, that's a really, really promising thing. And we should be thinking more about that.
This widening appeal for all kinds of electric vehicles has actually led to some sales increasing. Tesla and Ford may be having trouble, but 6 of the 10 biggest EV manufacturers in the US saw their sales go up this year.
And I think a lot of analysts would stand to benefit from looking a lot more holistically at the market than to just like cherry pick a few data points and to say from there that the EV hype is over, EV market is dead, good luck to everybody. Like, there is still so much going on in the space and a lot of anticipation, excitement, and exciting products. And I mean, frankly, solutions in the works for a lot of the most common problems that people cite. The EV market is not actually dying. With any rapidly growing industry, there are always hiccups. And this is true, especially in the tech industry of like any new product. And, there are roadblocks along the way, but there's so much more like federal and international and community support now for the EV world than there was even 10 years ago. And I think people need to keep that in mind.
Coming up, if the EV isn't really dying, why do we all think it is?
This podcast is sponsored by Ramp. Are you a business leader considering a new credit card and spend management system? You could stick with the old school process, multiple systems that work against each other and create more work for you. Or you could try Ramp. Ramp helps businesses manage their finance operations with a corporate card and spend management software that includes accounting automation, vendor payments, travel booking, and more, all in one platform. Whether you're a startup, a small business, or have thousands of employees, Ramp's intuitive software gives you maximum control over spend. Ramp's smart tools enforce compliance, prevent fraud, and provide real-time insights. Stop overspending and save up to 5%. Plus, Ramp automates data entry and routine time-consuming tasks. It's all done for you. You'll close your books in hours instead of days and give your team time to focus on what really matters, the bottom line. And now get $250 when you join Ramp for free. Just go to ramp.com/easy. Ramp.com/easy. RAMP.com/easy.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank and Celtic Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello, I'm Simon Jack.
And I'm Sing Sing.
And together we host Good Bad Billionaire, the podcast exploring the minds, the motives, and the money of some of the world's richest individuals.
Every episode, we pick a billionaire and we find out how they made their money.
And then we judge them. Are they good, bad, or just another billionaire?
Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hey, it's Carvel Wallace, host of Slate's podcast How To, and we just hit our 5-year anniversary. That's over 250 episodes of life-changing advice on every topic imaginable. And so to celebrate, my co-host Courtney Martin and I recently talked with the show's founder, Charles Duhigg.
We had a guest on once, and we were talking about talking to your kids about sex. And she said, you would never have one conversation with your kids about table manners and then assume that their table manners are going to be good for life, right? Instead, you have like 1,000 conversations with your kids about table manners.
Oh shit, Charles! Now I'm worried I haven't had enough table manners conversations. We definitely talked about sex a lot, but I don't know how much we've talked about table manners.
Just as long as they don't have sex at the table, they're good to go.
So far, so
as long
good.
as they know how to spoon, even if they don't know which spoon to use, it'll totally work out.
Oh, but
oh man. On How To, we answer your toughest questions with grace, wisdom, and humor, which is why 5 years on, we're still going strong. Listen to How To wherever you get your podcasts.
You mentioned politics, and EVs have sort of increasingly picked up political connotations. Can you talk us through more of the discourse on the right about electric vehicles and how that has impacted the industry and our perception of it?
Yeah, totally. So I think you see a little culture warring on quote unquote both sides. I mentioned, of course, the liberal disgust with Elon Musk's direction. And on the other hand, you have a lot of fear mongering from prominent Republicans like Texas's Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz, who are saying that the left wants to take away your gas engines and restrict the ability you have to drive. I think because EVs are so associated with climate change and resultantly so associated with liberals in the conservative mind, that just becomes another easy thing for them to nitpick about. There's also the foreign government aspect to it too, with, again, as I mentioned earlier, so many metals and parts and companies being based in foreign countries, and often in China there's like this whole thing about we're just doing like giveaways to foreign companies, or we're just like giving a handout to the Chinese. And I mean, it's ridiculous. There's so much more domestic manufacturing going on now than ever before, but of course this is a convenient talking point for anyone who just wants to spread a little bit of nonsense. I think one thing that's worth keeping in mind is that a lot of federal investments in EVs and green tech in general have gone to a lot of red states like Georgia, which have very much welcomed them. You know, there are a lot of folks, including Georgia's governor, who say we may not drive an EV for climate reasons, but we drive it because it's a good car. And I am hopeful that that sort of talking point and perception will take us over the other stuff.
You know, in some ways, it's unsurprising that this relatively new industry has hit some hiccups, but it is an industry that is going to be incredibly important because it has huge implications for the environment and this looming, constantly ticking time bomb of climate change. What do you think needs to happen in the coming years for EVs to be considered successful?
I mean, I think the way that EVs will really become a success is, one, if we adapt a broader definition, if we're not just using EVs as shorthand for cars, but we're using EVs to refer to all the other two-wheel ways or smaller transport ways that transport can be electrified. I think that right there will be a big victory and a much clearer perspective on what this market can be and what it can do and how successful it can be. I think it's worth noting that e-bikes are booming around the world, still are. Two, I think there needs to be a lot more international agreement and cooperation around this stuff. There's a lot of, I think, coming competition and exploitation when it comes to the metals and minerals that source a lot of these cars, and we need better frameworks and regulations and agreements about how we source these metals, how we, put this stuff together, how we dispose of the waste, how we measure not just the environmental impact of the car on the road, but everything that led to the car being made in the first place. And three, I think we really get to a point of success when having an EV is just like another thing you have. I think in the early days of the Prius, it was very much like a thing people would point to, right? And like either like laugh at or just kind of go like, ooh, ah, like that person's in a Prius. But now, I mean, it's a pretty common car and almost like now a little behind the times, if anything. Same with Tesla in its early years. I mean, now if you're in any big city, you're likely to find Teslas and their charging stations anywhere. And in that vein too, I think what will really, really help is when charging at an electrified station, or just having more additional supplemental shops for, batteries and battery swapping, or for charging, fast charging, for charging using energy from clean energy sources, when all of that just becomes a much more common roadside attraction.
So you made it clear the electric vehicle isn't dead, but what would you say their current position is right now?
That's a great question. I think their current position is they are growing, and growing pretty fast. And anytime you have like a big acceleration, adoption, like development wave like this, there are always going to be hiccups, especially since we've just come from like some very weird economic times after the pandemic, after the supply chain and energy shocks of the past couple of years. So they're definitely still growing. They're just not like dominant yet, but they're very much still on track.
Tish, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Nitish Pahwa is an associate writer on business and tech for Slate. And that's the show. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, and Anna Phillips. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio for Slate. TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you're a fan of the show, I have a small request for you. Please become a Slate Plus member. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. We'll be back next week with more episodes. I'm Cheyna Roth, filling in for Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.